Welcome to DVC Alumni, where every story inspires the next. The official podcast of the Diablo Valley College Alumni Association. As we celebrate 75 years of DVC's impact on education, careers, and community, we're honored to share the incredible journeys of alumni who've transformed their time on our vibrant campus into meaningful careers, community contributions, and personal success. Each Tuesday, we spotlight DVC alumni, from first-generation graduates to entrepreneurs, educators, and leaders who share the triumphs, challenges, and pivotal moments that shaped their lives. And on Thursdays, it's Resource Thursday. We dive into the programs, departments, and services that make DVC the supportive, dynamic community it is, exploring how they serve students and how you can connect with them. Whether you're a current student, recent graduate, or longtime alum, join us as we honor DVC's legacy and discover how our past continues to inspire the future. Thank you for being part of this journey. Be sure to tune in, subscribe, and celebrate with us. DVC Alumni, where every story inspires the next. And now, join our host, Alumni Manager, Charlie Daly.
And we are live. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Darrell Foote. I'm a local Contra Costa resident and grew up in Warnock Creek and an alumni of DVC. And happy to be here to talk about anything that's happened in my long DVC career and the things I've done afterwards.
Cool. So to be perfectly transparent to everybody, it turns out that we actually know each other through my son. Yeah. And you guys work together at Tahoe Joe's, which is now gone. But yeah, I'm sure you had an illustrious career there, much like he did.
Well, and I got that position because of a connection from DVC.
Oh, okay. So we'll get to that. That's actually will be a good thing. So let's start with where you grew up.
I was born and raised in Warnock Creek. My parents moved there in the 70s to escape San Francisco. And it was pretty idyllic in some ways. And I think it didn't seem that way at the time. But, there's always some headwinds when you're growing up and dealing with anything in adolescence. Yeah. But WCI, Los Lomas, and a lot of excellent opportunities that afforded me. And DVC seemed like the best option after Los Lomas to be able to do what I wanted to do at that time, which was go into engineering.
Oh, okay. So you were going to be an engineer, which those are people way smarter than me anyway. So they're way better at math. So you went from Los Lomas, where you developed a love of engineering, which actually is a wonderful career. You got here, and talk about your experience here at DVC.
Well, and it dovetails a little bit too. In Los Lomas, we had the best automotive technology program in the area, and it was run through the Regional Occupation Program. It's still around, and they actually still have an automotive technology program there today, which is interesting because there's a lot of attrition of those types of classes. And through Glenn Amesbury, who was the instructor there was a lot of excellent hands-on opportunity to see that applied engineering. And, as a teenager, I really liked cars. So then coming here, one of the first things I did was I got involved in the machine shop program here under David Johnson, which it turns out my father had taken classes from in 1979. So that coupled with kind of the academics was really helpful. It was very interesting to see how that started kind of this pathway that was very winding. And I've done a lot of like a mosaic of careers is how someone put it once. And I like that terminology. I think that applies to a lot of people you've had on this show and even yourself. As you say, this is your fourth career.
Yeah.
So. And with David Johnson, not only manual machining, but also computer numerical control, or CNC machining, where a computer controls the machine, you program it in. And then after a couple years of doing that, I was working at a motorcycle shop, and next door to the motorcycle shop, an ice sculptor moved in. Now, he was a Culinary Institute of America, New York trained chef, and he got out of the kitchen because he didn't like the frenetic pace of it. And he started an ice sculpture business. And you wouldn't think there'd be a market big enough to support that, but there were more than 2 large ice sculptor businesses in the area. And he ran this one out of Concord, out of a spot kind of near Costco over there, had a giant freezer. He moved next door to the motorcycle shop. And then on my 21st birthday, this big truck shows up, and it's got this enormous crate, and it's a CNC machine for ice sculpture, which was about the best birthday gift I could get. And being a chef, he had no idea how to use that. And I said, I'll help you learn how to use that. And then I started working 2 full-time jobs. So I eventually became his production manager. I spent all that summer learning ice sculpture and then applying the skills I had learned at DVC through the CNC program to run not only the machine, but also the kind of the methods of managing the workflow in the shop and applying those industrial best practices that were passed on here to something that would never have any exposure to that because it's not part of any industry where you learn that. A kitchen is run very differently than a machine shop floor. But kind of trying to meld those two was a very interesting experience. He's still got the shop in the same area.
So what is the name? I never knew that you could take a CNC machine and start creating ice sculptures, but so what's the name of the shop? We'll give him a shout out.
Chislett Ice. And actually Bob Chislett, his real name.
Okay.
He was an instructor here. Yeah.
Okay.
So he actually instructed ice sculpting in the culinary department here for a few semesters. And during that time, I was still helping him out. And one time I delivered some blocks of ice. We have these big block makers. They're 40 by 20 by 10 inches. It uses basically a trash compactor bag. You put the water in the bag and these big plates freeze it into a large block of ice in that size. And then you use a little crane and you pull it out and put it into the freezer. So I delivered a couple of blocks down here. That summer, after that class, I'm on a Royal Caribbean cruise in the Eastern Caribbean. And I'm up at the Sky Bar one night, 14th deck, looking out over the water, having a martini. And I'm at a table. And up at the bar, there's a very nice looking young lady. And she comes and sits down. And then 2 gentlemen approach the bar. And so this would have been about 2006. You had a lot of ex-military folks coming back from the various events going on. And they're talking to her. And she looks a little like looking for an escape route. So she looks at me. And she sees I'm at a table and she makes eye contact. And she says, "You look familiar." And of course I say, I don't know where I know you from, but please come sit down. It turns out she was a student in that class. She actually had seen me before. I thought she was just looking for an out, and I was happy to provide that. But she had gone to that class. She had seen me deliver that. So we had a nice conversation, and I got to spend some time with her throughout the rest of the cruise. And it was a neat perspective to see.
Well, and boy, talk about nonlinear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm very good at that in conversation too. So
yes.
Please rein me in if need be.
Well, no, actually, I'm used to that with, family and stuff like that. You've talked to my son and you know how nonlinear. That's a family trait on that side of the family. But so that's interesting. I had never knew that they had an ice sculpting class here at DVC. That's and I imagine that at some point in the near future, they'll probably resurrect that because that's going to come back in.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I'm just imagining just because I can't think of, it's a way to show artistry and then at the same time be involved in something as creative and yet so non-permanent. I mean, it's kind of like the
ultimate expression of the impermanence of beauty.
Yeah. Between that and the beautiful chalk drawings that people do, like in downtown Martinez, they do those festivals and stuff, which is the Italian festival, I think it is. But, so you did the CNC stuff, you worked the motorcycle shop, which I didn't even know that about you, which is exciting. So what other classes? I mean, you've taken an engineering class, you've taken a number of engineering classes. You obviously ended up somehow involved with the culinary program, at least dropping off blocks of ice. But tell us a little bit.
My biggest involvement with the culinary program was as a customer of the pastries that they used to put out. I remember that shop. And then on Thursdays after 2:30 when they would go half price, it was fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah. So everything else, nothing's a better deal than a fruit tart for $1.25.
Yes.
Even in $2004. But there's a lot of impact that DVC had in direct application of classes, which is interesting because that one of my father's frustrations with academics and his college career was that he never utilized his labor management or labor relations major that he got from USF. And speaking of your guest, 2 guests ago, I forget the gentleman's name, but he spoke of the experience on Chico and in DVC campuses during the Vietnam War. My father was a little bit ahead of that because he graduated high school in 65. But, losing your 2S because you didn't get the good grades and USF didn't do the blanket A's like Chico was doing was a big deal. So my father stayed in school to avoid a very unpleasant outcome in Asia, and then found that he never applied that degree. He was a manager in Pacific Bell and then moved into software quality assurance. I've been able to apply everything at DVC to some way or another, whether it's been the chemistry classes, whether it's been biology classes, the psychology classes, the communications classes, the engineering classes, the machine shop classes, even the metal casting art classes. They've all been useful in some way, and even if it's just in kind of managing interpersonal relationships and having something interesting to say, maybe at a party.
Yeah. Well, and I know just you listed all the things you learned here, and then I think about what you do now, which we'll get into in a moment. But that actually, and I know you were talking about Matt Gashard, who was the gentleman.
Yes.
He did a lot of stuff, and he credits DVC as his launching point. So one of the things I think about is that with what you're doing now, pretty much everything you took at DVC applies. So let's talk a little bit, kind of get from then to now.
Okay.
So, and as we discussed earlier, it's like life is not linear. So,
well, there used to be a great show, and if you remember the host name, remind me, but it was called Connections, right? And it had all these.
I remember that. I love that show, and it was one of my favorites. Yes.
Which was great. But you had all these kind of disparate things, and you would go bounce around the world from this to this to this, and at the end there was this big reveal. It was like, now you know the rest of the story, to tie in another show reference.
Yeah.
So after it wasn't always good for me at DVC, mostly because maybe I wasn't focusing as much as I should have. And so I actually was kicked out through academic probation at one point. Yeah,
okay.
I had too many bad grades, too many W's, and had to talk to the dean and get back in, and I did. So I went for several years, and then I got heavily involved in the ice sculpture business, which I never foresaw, and did that very heavily. And then I said, I want to get back into and see if I can get my engineering degree. So then I joined again, and I had to take public speaking 120. And I just happened to pick Paul Phelan as my teacher. And that was life-altering, as I'm sure many of students of Paul could say. I ended up being a teacher's assistant for him for numerous semesters and taking up to 20 units a semester because I was loaded with speech and debate, public speaking, and TAing. Through that, he got me involved with a contact of his that ran a restaurant, Tony LaForte Sr. and Zio Fredos.
Yes.
He also got me involved with Dave Kula, who was a manager over at Tahoe Joe's, which is how I got in there, along with another student of his, Ilea Adams, who her last name is different now. She's married. She's expecting. She was my community rep partner with Tahoe Joe's. So there's the beginning of PR, right? And community relations. Through Zio Fredos, I met an individual who was another regular. She happened to live at the condos behind there. Her name was Marina Gottschalk, and she was a dear friend of mine. She's since passed on in 2022. I miss her daily. But she said to me, "Oh, you're a student at TVC. You should join this group that on a monthly basis goes and meets with the local refinery to hear about what they're doing." And so that was my introduction to the community advisory panel process. So she got me in there in 2008. So you can see I graduated in 2000, and then I kind of left in 2004. I came back in 2006, then got involved with that in 2008. Then that's when the restaurant work kind of took over and became my life, and that pulled me out of school again, focused on that. And through the community advisory panel process, now I'm interfacing with industry on a monthly basis, which was fascinating. So Mike Marcy and Ken Dami were the contacts at the time at the Tesoro refinery over at what is traditionally Avon, or the Golden Eagle refinery out there. So if you're on 680 going north towards the bridge, it's the one on the right, which is as opposed to the one on the left, which is the Shell refinery, which is now Martini's refining company run by PBF Energy. So I was on the community advisory panel there as a community member with various kind of areas of representation for 10 years. And through a lot of the experience I had here in public speaking classes and with science classes and with engineering technology classes, I was in an interesting position to understand different facets of what was being presented in a way that allowed me to communicate to my other community advisory panel community members, something that was accessible to them. So to take a technical concept and to try and interpret that and reinterpret that for their benefit. So in 2018, Tom Stewart, who was the facilitator of that community advisory panel, and several others in the area said, "Do you want to take over when I retire?" I didn't know it was quite as immediate as it was. And in the meantime, besides working restaurants, also because of DVC and the SolidWorks training, the computer-aided design training here, I had gotten involved with semiconductor work.
Oh.
Yes. So there's a whole nother chunk there, which is...
Okay. So
and this is relevant to
Well, so first I want to say, so I recently recorded, and it hasn't been released yet, but a young lady who, she went off and she did a whole bunch of work from here at DVC. She went on to get her chemical engineering degree up at UC Davis, but she worked with the coffee roastery. They have a program up there. Wow. So she's talking about how coffee roasts, she's got all these things that I'm like going, I have no clue what she's talking about. But I can see where having that background in engineering and CNC and all the other stuff, and then being able to literally translate it to guys like me who don't understand the language or the process, but being able to, I call it speak English, just because I used to work a lot with law enforcement, and they have their own nomenclature too. Yes. And it's just, until you know what it means and really understand it, it sounds like any foreign language. So anyways, go ahead. So,
well, and this is also, thanks to the woman who is now my wife, she said, we're going to dance classes over in Alamo, in Orinda, not Alamo. That was later. And she says, let's hang out and talk to the advanced class. And through that person, I found a contact who said, you do SolidWorks. My boss needs that. And there was a gentleman who had an office in Lafayette, just on Mount Diablo Boulevard there. You'd never think it was there. And he made precision equipment for dicing or separating semiconductor die from the wafer. When they're built on a wafer, it kind of looks like a CD, but it's either 6 or 8 inches, sometimes 4 inches in diameter. And that's a big chunk of silicon that's, a tenth of a millimeter thick.
And really expensive.
And yes. And some of them, you can have $40,000 or $50,000 on a cheap wafer.
Yeah.
Of the front end processing by the time you do implant and ion implantation and then the patterning with all of the photolithography. And then you got to break it up into individual die. So there's been different methods over time. He made a scribe and break machine. So it's just like you're cutting glass. You use a scriber and you impart stress down through the crystalline structure, and then you fold it kind of a little bit on that, and that bit of stress causes it to break at where you've put that stress. And then you can dice it up just like you could glass. The more modern method is to use a grinding system, and the trouble with that is it's messy. You've got saws grinding away the silicon, and so you have a water and silicon slurry that results from that. You got to clean it afterwards. So any kind of MEMS device, micro electromechanical system device, doesn't like that because it gums up the works. But also, it takes a lot of real estate, right? So one of the things that various people have tried is using a etching process where you actually use some kind of chemical reaction to remove the material. And the trouble is they're always isometric, right? So it's always going to etch sideways as well as down. And so you have to have a lot of room for it to get sideways if you're trying to get down 100 microns.
So now you're giving up real estate that you could put a chip on and
So there's something called the Bosch process. It was developed, I think, in the 70s. And there's a couple of different companies out there that utilize this for dicing. And you alternate, a deposition process with a plastic protective layer, and then you have some directionality to the etch ions because you bias with a high frequency, RF, and you get them to flow downwards, kind of impact more at the bottom than the sides. And so you can get, you can etch down a canyon that's 10 microns wide or and 100 microns deep. Something that's like really good fidelity on that.
And see, folks, all this came from DVC. So.
And other mentorship, right?
Yes.
But because of that, I was able. The problem is if you have stuff on the back of that, like a metal layer, it doesn't etch through that. So what we ended up developing over the next 5 years was a method of cleaving the metal on the backside of the die that the etch couldn't clear. And so we built a machine and we sent it over to Asia, and I supported it. I went and optimized it. And once again, this is all using fundamental concepts that I learned here at DVC, and even back to when I was an automotive mechanic in high school, and once again, the RP program.
Yeah.
So there's a great anecdote with this. We're trying to get this machine tuned, and you've got these mechanical systems, these servo systems, where you have a motor that has input from a sensor that tells it where it is, and you have to feedback that through a computer that says move the motor this much at this rate. And if you have two of those motors and they're linked, like on a gantry style system, it's tough. So we have to take off that gantry so we can tune each individual motor. Well, these little stainless steel Allen screws holding the gantry on wouldn't budge, and they start to strip out at the heads. And my boss is starting to freak out because if we don't get this thing delivered, all the IP, all the money, all the agreements that we have with this customer, it's all in an escrow, and they're going to take it back if we don't meet the delivery date. And not being able to tune the motor is going to make us miss the delivery date. And now the screw is stripping, and who's going to come and fix it? Fortunately, when I worked for the automotive mechanic, my boss there had taught me, you put a Torx bit in there. And that's like just do that. So we beat that into it, pulled the screw out, tuned the motors, and sent it off. And so this thing I learned working on the oil pan of some old Volkswagen diesel that my boss taught me ended up saving this multi-$100,000 deal.
So I used to be a gearhead, and a long time ago. And by the way, I have a definite love for VWs. I've got one sitting in my driveway that's in the process of getting fixed up. But that was the thing I learned working on cars that does not translate well to working on bicycles is sometimes you got to use some force. Yeah. A hammer is usually your best tool. So anyway, sorry for the sideways.
No, some persuasion there.
Yes.
Yeah, you have to do it judiciously.
Yes.
Because it's easy to break stuff, especially when you're working with really fine stuff.
Yeah.
So that also put me in contact with a whole different world, right? When you're dealing with advanced manufacturing, advanced technology, and I was dealing with some of the highest echelon folks in technology development departments in various large semiconductor companies, and was still essentially a DVC dropout, right? And it was the disparity in the alphabet soup in the name after people's names that I was interfacing with, and then just me, I'm some waiter.
You're a guy.
I'm just some guy who used to be a waiter, used to be a mechanic, and I kind of found myself falling into this. Was very interesting to me, and I felt very gratified that I had been equipped with just the basic skill set in so many different areas to excel in many different fields. But I think if there's one takeaway, and I pass this on to my son a lot, is even though I learned a lot, I didn't have that degree. The degree opens a lot of doors. So if I'd been this successful without a degree, what could I have done with one? So I think that maybe there's some time, like I kept on going back and learning new skills, and there's benefit in that. But if I had had a degree, it would have opened other doors. So having the best of both worlds. So anything I say here, like, oh, I managed to do this even though I didn't have a degree, I hope no one takes that as an endorsement of not getting one.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have a degree, but I kind of hail from a different time. But I do absolutely think it is one of those things that you should achieve to. And the reason is sometimes it's that gets you through that first door. And after that, it's all up to you. And obviously you've done remarkable things, because now you're dealing with heads of senior heads of silicon, companies and manufacturing and all that stuff. And, while you don't have those letters after it, obviously you have a good core competence that you help develop here.
Well, and being willing and able to learn, and to never think you know everything. I think if there's one skill set, when I've done job interviews, the thing that I've said is, if there's one skill I can bring, it's the skill of knowing how to learn. And that's something that you keep on refining here, at a community college, because you have so much opportunity to learn new things, different areas, and to adapt to that. So now I've got this varied background, right? I've been in food service. I've been in, heavy machinery maintenance. I've been, an ice sculptor. I've been a technology developer for semiconductor manufacturing equipment, and a test engineer, essentially. And I didn't ever put engineer on my business card, but my boss said, yeah, what you're doing is engineering, which was very validating to hear. And one of the ways that I impressed him was because we were in a car ride one time, and I'm relating to him something I learned in chemistry about, how water exists as, OH minus and H plus and H2O, kind of different equilibrium. Thank you, Karen Long, for those lessons, even though I had to take the class twice. And so now I'm interfacing with people in industry that utilizes all of that. They have a machine shop over at the refinery, right? They need to fix the various things there. They're dealing with chemistry on a daily basis. They're dealing with investor relations, which is, something that I dealt with. They're dealing with, IP law. They're dealing with the SEC. They have a lot of constraints that allow them. This is what they can say. This is what they can't say. And so you learn about, and a lot of it is community relations. And I learned that through working with Tony at the restaurant after working with Paul as a TA. So there's this whole kind of thread that builds this tapestry, right? And then now, since Marina's passing, I facilitate 6 different community advisory panels through most of the large industrial sites here in Contra Costa County. And to see a lot of the commonalities of concerns, not only from the community members that interface with them, but from the sites themselves and the challenges that we're all going to face, in the future, as we see a number of different concerning events on the horizon. You probably see this here at the college as well. People call it different things. I call it the generational skills cliff. Other people call it the silver wave. We have this very, very experienced core of folks that are going to be leaving us for retirement or, through attrition in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And it's already happening. How do we take that information, that experience, that knowledge that they have, and pass it on to the people that need to keep all these systems going so that we continue to have the quality of life we've come to expect and want to continue to further? So that's a good question for another podcast.
Well, and I'm just thinking is you have two sides of this. You have the community is always concerned. Excuse me. And their concerns are valid, but they may not be as well informed as. And then you have the So for instance, it's like they're concerned about flare-ups, and because you're representing refineries or you're talking to them, flare-ups or outgassing or all the other things that occur. And some of this is just stuff that happens, and then some of it is stuff that maybe could be controlled better. But it's also getting through the process of being able to communicate where we're at now and moving to where we need to be. And I think often folks in general and large groups of people tend to think that we can just make it all happen now, and nothing occurs. Nothing is that binary.
Yeah.
If in a system, it's like you can't just shut it off. Years ago, I worked over in Benicia, and there was a power outage in the industrial area, and there was a power outage. The whole area shut down. The amount of problems for the then the Exxon, I think it's Valero now, refinery was just because they suddenly lost everything. And so it's, there's smoke coming out of stuff. There's, and then they got to get everything up and going. And that took a month or whatever it took. And so, again, I think it's that. And there's also a certain level that you have to be at to make it happen at all. The other thing I look at too, and I guess we're going to have to do another podcast on this, and actually that'll get to one of our other points is I look at the amount of jobs, and because a lot of times people just look at the guy that goes or gal that goes and runs the machinery. I think of people like my son, for instance. He works over at Chevron, and he isn't employed directly by them, but he's an electrician employed over there. And so there's this huge cascade effect of employment that goes on.
Exactly.
And so I think that's going to be, obviously this is going to have to be a subject for another matter, but we'll talk briefly about the CAP, Community Advisory Panel, and briefly about that. And then let's get on to what the future looks like.
With community advisory panels, and you mentioned this, representing the refinery, that's absolutely not what I do. They have some very good people that do that in different areas, right? So my job as the facilitator for these community advisory panels is to bring a group of people, members of the community, to the table to interface with representatives from the site, because it's not just refineries, there's other sites too, chem plants and things like that. And now, there's 2 refineries in Contra Costa and 2 renewable fuel facilities.
Okay.
we have to be sure of that, because they will remind you. Is that P66 and Marathon don't process any crude anymore. It's all renewable feedstocks and animal and vegetable fats. So you get this group of community members, and this could be proximate residential neighbors, fence line neighbors, or other stakeholders like business owners in the community, and part of that cascade effect, right? Or people from the school board, people from the local high school or elementary school, people from different nonprofits in the area. But people who are engaged, people who are involved, people who are curious, and people who are most importantly collaborative. They're willing to. They may have areas of concern, and they may distrust industry in general, but they're willing to come and listen and to take that information that they receive and kind of build it into their perspective and act on it. They're not dead set on this is wrong or this is evil and you guys are lying to us. That's not a productive mindset, right?
No.
So what's very positive about this is you find that there are a lot of people out there in the community that they understand that there is economic benefit to having this, but they also don't want to sacrifice the quality of life and the environmental and health and safety that is a component of that quality of life. And they feel they shouldn't have to. And I agree with that. They definitely should not have to. And what's interesting, what's very gratifying, is you find that everyone inside the fence line also agrees with that. And I was like, oh, well, you're talking to the, environmental health and safety manager, or, health, safety, environment manager and security manager. They have kind of different names. And they're agreeing with you like, oh, yeah, now this is what we have to do. This is the incredible number of regulatory agencies that we report to make sure that happens. We even have stuff at a county level here that's kind of best in the world, people would say.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I think the county ISO is one of the most stringent out there. And that's something that in unincorporated area businesses, and production sites have to report to through the county health department. And then there's California, Accidental Release Protection Program, CalARP, which is kind of the state level one. So if they are in a municipality, they report through that. So there's coverage either way. But, we have enormous regulatory compliance that all these sites have to manage and to constantly interface with. And then when you show that to a community member, they see, oh, you guys you're trying to keep me safe. These agencies are trying to keep me safe. There's a lot of people working. And if they don't interface with that, maybe through the CAP process or maybe through some other process, it's a black box and no one sees what's happening. And it's easy to have these mistrusts build in that vacuum of understanding.
Well, I think at that point, everything becomes a soundbite.
Yes.
And these are really complicated issues. I mean, this is not, it's, I don't like sound bites because the thing is, and by the way, we're going to turn this into a sound bite. But I don't like the process of folks that want to govern by sound bite. Mm-hmm. It really is, because there is nothing that's that simple. People are complicated. It just is. So how would people get involved in basically basically peeling back the black box? How do people get into that process? How do they find out?
Well, if anyone wants to know more about the community advisory panel process and the various sites that operate one, most of the large sites have them. And this is all thanks to Dow, who was the leader on this. Dow Pittsburgh was the second oldest cap in the nation after Midland. Reach out to me. You can put my contact information up on however you want to.
We will. We'll put it in the show notes, and then and also give a shout out and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm happy to to find an area where maybe there's a good fit, because this is a great way to kind of gather some interest of folks who, once again, want to be educated on this, where they want to know some more information, and then take that information and use it to kind of further what we all are looking for, was trying to maintain and improve the quality of life for everybody as much as possible, right? So let's see, the idea. I've managed to confuse myself, right? The idea that there's these people who are willing to be collaborative, right? You find that word just pops up again and again and again, and there's I think, especially now, more of a need for that than there ever has been before. In this case, folks are coming to a table usually on a monthly basis. They're sitting down with the leadership team of a site, so maybe the site manager, the HSE person, the maintenance manager, and the public affairs person, and then they're learning information about how flaring works, what it does, why it happens, what that noise you heard last night was, why it woke you up, why it was so loud.
What's that smell?
What's that smell?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, that's the marshland.
Yes.
Or the
Yes.
asphalt plant, not the roofing company, not the refinery, right? So, and being able to attribute that effectively to learn actually how you can say, you can work productively with these people in your community instead of working constantly against them, and then wasting all that energy just in tension instead of anything that gets done.
Yeah, I'm for some reason this I had this visual of like 100 years ago here in Contra Costa County is you'd have a barn raising. All your neighbors would get together, and you would literally, everybody cook, they bring the barbecue, and then everybody gets together and raises a barn. And I like that visual better for what this is about, as opposed to the us versus them,
right?
Because the thing is, at the end of the day, we all got to live here, so.
Yeah, exactly. And that, I think that one of the things that people don't recognize a lot is that cascade effect of economic value that the industry represents in the area. And this is not me trying to be pro-industry. This is me just recognizing that a large part of our economy here in Contra Costa, and we're a huge economy in Contra Costa County. I think it was 2022, we had $81 billion in GDP.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So
I think there's small countries that would love to have that.
Yeah, Lithuania is smaller than us on GDP.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
So there are European countries that have less GDP than us, just in Contra Costa. Not to mention California is like fifth or sixth largest in the world. And you think about that, you put that in context. That's the world today, which is, as far as we know, the most advanced the world has ever been in all of human history. And California is at that position, and Contra Costa is at that position in California. So we are globally significant here in Contra Costa. This isn't small potatoes. And each individual that interfaces, does their part here in Contra Costa has global impact, one way or another.
So we've talked about reaching out to you to get involved in some of these community advisory panels, or just generally information about how to find out more about this. Excuse me. I know one of the things, unless you wanted to continue on that, I wanted to move on to, you and I had talked offline a week or so ago, whenever that was, about starting a discussion. Essentially, what we want to do is talk about a deep dive into various topics. And why don't you talk a little bit? I mean, we can both talk about it, but let's go.
I would defer to you on this, but I think that, as we discussed, there's definitely a need to try and bring forward more visibility of that collaborative nature, that people who are willing to find a path forward that is productive. We have a new district supervisor in our county.
Give her a shout out.
Yep, Chanel Scales Preston. She's the hope of many, many folks. We're looking forward to a lot of good things. And in discussion with her, she's looking for people who are willing to collaborate. She wants, people who can bring challenges forward, who can ask the tough questions, but who are willing to find solutions, not just complaints, right? And that interest in finding some solutions and willing to work with that. Those are the voices we need to hear more of. And to hear more of that, and this goes back to something you learn in speech and debate, media influences reality, reality influences media. It's kind of this, self-feeding cycle. If we're able to do something that reaches out to people and normalizes tough discussion that's not an attack.
Yes.
I think that's the type of discussions we need to see more of. And maybe we can make some positive sound bites out of that stuff. But, and I think that, like you've said, the time is very ripe for that. When she had her swearing in I think it was on the 14th this month, right? So last week, so many people filled the Board of Supervisors chamber to support not only her, but, the other reelected supervisors, Candace Anderson and Diane Burgess were there as well, celebrating their reelection with their family members. But there was so much good energy in that room, so much positivity. And we just need to work at getting that maintained and push forward to something that enables us to achieve something. So if we're seeing that there, if we can bring that through media, through the fourth estate, which is very much struggling nowadays,
yes,
to try and do some outreach and to normalize that, I think there's a lot of value in that. To that end, having these discussions, asking the tough questions, but seeking to do so from a point of wanting to understand, not to gotcha, right?
Yes, and I think part of I absolutely love that, because the thing is I want to have a deep discussion about tough issues like, whether it's addiction or homelessness or industry or name a struggling, an area we struggle in, and not to say, what are you doing? It's like, let's talk about the issue. What can we? Yes, thank you. Thank you. And that's the thing that I want to do with our, and to be named later podcast, but at least the discussion, and maybe we can have her on as one of our first guests.
Yeah.
And she might like that, and again, so yeah, I do want to find that common ground. And I do think DVC is one of those common ground kind of places, because the story I hear constantly is people showed up here, they didn't know what else they were going to do, and they really found themselves here. A lot of them don't have linear stories about. Almost none of them have a linear story. Even when they start, there's Dr. Galvez, which I'll send you his link to his. He wanted to be a doctor because his dad had been a doctor in Peru. He comes here. He was a kind of a lousy student in high school, and then he gets here and he learned how to study here. He says experience here at DVC prepared him for Stanford Medical School. UC Berkeley did not. So. But it's that finding your path here, even if it's not linear, and oftentimes the most exciting paths are the ones that meander a little bit.
Well, and to use a modern phrase, colleges and campuses should be a safe space for ideas, right? And to that end, it helps if they're somewhat agnostic and they're not partisan. And so I've seen that with another DVC organization, which isn't necessarily part of DVC, but is definitely from DVC, and that's the Diablo Valley Tech Initiative.
Oh, yes.
Right. And so what's neat there is when you have that group meet, there are people from economic development of, whether it's private economic development, nonprofits, whether it's municipal or county level economic development interests and the managers that show up from there, or whether it's individuals from the community. Maybe they're entrepreneurs, maybe they're business people, maybe they're potential entrepreneurs, maybe they're DVC students. But that discussion space it doesn't have a policy position, right? And so you have this freedom. They're not representing existing industry. They're not representing a municipality or a government institution in any way, but they're able to bring that discussion forward. And so DVC as a place to kind of find the ideas and to have that discussion in a way that isn't it's not challenging because there's an interest behind it. It's just, well, how can we find a way forward that can serve all of us? And a community college campus especially seems to me an excellent incubator for that, just as it is an incubator for so many other great things.
Well, I think we'll end on that note. So I greatly appreciate the time that you've come in and spent with me on this. We'll have more, we'll figure out what this podcast looks like and release it. And we'll do an initial announcement through the Alumni Association and probably through DVTI or whatever other avenues we have. But, yeah, this was fun. I appreciate it a great deal. And it's like, I couldn't believe the common, talk about this is 2 degrees of separation. Yeah. So it's just as, I know half the people you're talking about too from my chamber days. So,
it was very amusing that you worked so close with Len Shapiro.
Yes.
Who was also a very close friend of Marina and, was really there for her up until the end.
Yeah. Now, Len is, he's getting up there in the years, but I mean, he was, I remember him from my Pleasantville Baseball Association days, and it was great. So, and with that, we're going to log off. Again, thank you so much for coming in, and we'll look forward to doing some more collaboration.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to DVC Alumni, where every story inspires the next. The official podcast of the Diablo Valley College Alumni Association, celebrating 75 years of DVC's incredible impact on education, careers, and community. We hope today's episode gave you valuable insights into the journeys of our alumni and the powerful resources available at DVC. Don't forget to join us every Tuesday for inspiring alumni stories and on Resource Thursdays, where we spotlight DVC's departments and services, showing you how they're shaping student success. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries and exploring the connections that make DVC's legacy so special. And remember, DVC Alumni, where every story inspires the next.